I told Tracy last night that I was just going to preach what he preached last week. So, he went through Romans 1, and so I thought I'd go through Romans 1 too. And Tracy last week, I wasn't here, but I listened to it, and I listened to Bob's message, and he went through the doctrine that's taught in Romans chapter 1. Well, that doctrine has a history attached to it. And what we're going to do this morning is we're going to go through that history and see where God gave up the bodies, where God gave up the souls, and where God gave up the spirits. So Romans 1, it kind of describes the history of mankind down through up until God set the Gentiles aside. Then in Romans 2, it begins and it talks about how the Jews are guilty before God. And then the first 2/3 of Romans 3 puts that together and shows that the Jews and Gentiles are all guilty before God. So in Romans 1, that's about 2,500 years worth of history. So you read down through that and you think, he gave them up, and then you look back where he gave them up and you think, well, that's not very long. But it was, it's longer from the time when he dealt with the Gentiles up until he began dealing with Israel is longer than from the time of Christ till now. So it's a pretty long time. So let's start in Romans 1 and verse 24. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lusts of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. So how did they dishonor their own bodies? Well, turn back to Genesis chapter 6 and keep a marker in Romans 1 because we'll keep coming back to that. So turn back to Genesis 6. And in Genesis 6, we see how they began to dishonor their own bodies. And in Genesis 6:1, we read, it came to pass when men began to multiply in the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all they chose. So how did they dishonor their bodies between themselves? They gave their wives, their daughters, their whoever, to the women folk. They gave the women folk over to these fallen angels that came down, and that's how they dishonored their bodies. So then back in Romans 1, you see the progression that leads up to this. Starting in verse 21, because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like unto incorruptible man, and to birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. So if you, we're not going to read it. If you want to go back to it for a reference, you can. But back in Genesis 4, did I turn it on? I always have trouble with this thing now. There we go. Back in Genesis 4, we have the what's it called, genealogy of Cain, from Adam, then Cain, and it gives his genealogy. And here we have, I put down each one and what their names mean, and then the ones where it gives their occupation, I put down what their occupation was. So if you look down through that, there are 7 generations of Cain that are mentioned in the Bible. So if you just follow the meaning of their names and then the occupations that they had, you can almost see it. It almost just follows like the history of Israel, how they, up and down and up and down and then finally down. First, you look at Cain, and his name means possessor or maker. He built a city that was against God's will, because God said, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. So he rebelled against God by building that city. And then it seems like his son Enoch, it would seem like he turned back to God because he was initiated and consecrated. Then Arad, it would seem like he started out pretty good because his name can can mean city of witness, but it can also mean wild ass and descent into a valley. So it seems like he started out well, but he kind of turned into a wild ass and he descent down. Then Mehujael, he was bad enough to be destroyed by God in some way. He wasn't killed by God, but he was destroyed by God in some way. Then Methusael, he kind of shows a revival. He was a man of God asking for death. And he died who were inquiring of God. So he apparently was killed for inquiring after God. Then Lamech, his name is Powerful Destroyer. He becomes a very powerful man who is a destroyer. So he's a pretty bad guy. Then his wife Ada, she is adorned with ornaments. Now, when you're adorned with ornaments in the Bible, if it's God that's adorning you, that's a good thing. If you're adorning yourself, that's not a good thing. If you turn to Isaiah 3, in Isaiah 3, God shows you what he thinks about adorning yourself. And in Isaiah 3 and verse 16, he says, "Moreover, the Lord saith, because the daughters of Zion are haughty, and walk with stretched forth necks and wanton eyes, walking and mincing as they go, and making a tinkling with their feet, therefore the Lord will smite with a scab the crown of the head of the daughters of Zion, and the Lord will discover their secret parts. In the day the Lord will take away the bravery of their tinkling ornaments about their feet, and their cauls around their round tires like the moon," that's tires in their head, "the chains and the bracelets and the mufflers, the bonnets and the ornaments of the legs, the headbands and the tablets and the earrings, the rings and the nose jewels, the changeable suits of apparel and the mantles and the wimples and the crisping pins, the glasses and the fine linen and the hoods and the veils." So that's, God doesn't think a lot when you adorn yourself. When he adorns you, that's a different thing. Then the second wife was Zillah, and her name means shadow, which is obscurity or deprivation of light. So she seems like darkness. So then Jabal, he was, it says, leading, flowing river. And he says he was born of Ada, the first wife, and he was a dweller of tents and a cattle farmer. So he might have been kind of that faithful remnant who actually, he was a dweller in tents, not in cities, so that means he was moving around, and he was a keeper of cattle, so the cattle, they move around to get pasture, so he was kind of doing God's will by replenishing the earth and going out and not living in the city. Then you have Jubal and you have Tubal-Cain, and Jubal is a musician, and Tubal-Cain is the instructor of all artificers in brass and iron. So when you look at the word artificer, what's the first three letters there? Art. So he's the instructor of all the people that are making art, and here's his brother who's making all kinds of music. And when you think about that, what kind of art do you think he was making? He was probably making the idols, and his brother was making the music to go with the service. And when you think about that, remember when Nebuchadnezzar built an idol, and he said everybody has to fall down and worship it. And we read, and what signal do they take whenever they fall down and worship that idol? Well, it says in Daniel 3:5 that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimers, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And then finally, their sister, Naamah, which, it's kind of strange. Why would they name the sister? Why would they name this? Well, her name means that she was pleasant and sweetness. So when you look back in Genesis 6:1, it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. So they were fair. So here's Naamah, who's pleasant and sweet, and the brothers, they're making idols and making the music and the ceremonies to false gods. Their sister was fair, so this is kind of like an open invitation to the fallen angels saying, come on down, and they accepted that invitation. And you see that Cain's genealogy ends at the 7th generation, whereas Seth's genealogy in the next chapter, it goes down to the 9th generation, which means Cain was kind of, so why does his stop there? And I think it's because Cain was no longer the father of that generation that became the generation of the fallen angels after that. So God gave up man's bodies then when he sent a flood to cover all the earth. So now, but with let's see, with all three of these events, the giving up of the body, the giving up of the soul, and the giving up of the spirit, there is a covenant that goes along that is related to each one. So if you look in Genesis chapter 9, after God gives up men's bodies by destroying them, in Genesis chapter 9, we see that covenant. Genesis chapter 9 and verse 1. And God blessed Noah and his sons and said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every fowl of the air, upon all that moveth upon the earth, and upon the fishes of the sea. Into your hand are they delivered. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you, even as the green herb have I given you all things. So he's given up the animal bodies too, because they're allowed to kill the animals. But flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall ye not eat. And surely your blood of your lives will I require, at the hand of every beast will I require it, and at the hand of man, and at the hand of every man's brother I will require the life of man. Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God made he man. And then down in verse 13 you see, I do set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a token of a covenant between me and thee. Well, part of that covenant now is that man is allowed to take man's life. Before this happened, before God gave up their bodies, even God didn't take the life, because whenever Cain killed Abel, God didn't kill Cain. He exiled him. He sent him away. So God wasn't taking the life. So now he gives man that right for capital punishment. And that's part of giving up of the bodies, because now man can take man's life. If a certain man's guilty, you can take his life. Now, next, back to Romans 1, and the next we have their souls. So Romans 1:26, for this cause God gave them up unto vile affections. For even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. And likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men, working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error which was meet. So in verse 26 you notice that there's a colon after the word affections. So he's saying, for this cause God gave them up for vile affections. So that colon means this cause is going to come. It's like whenever you say to your child, this is the reason you're going to be punished, you disobeyed me. It's like that. So he's saying this is the reason why they were given up for their vile affections. And the cause that moved God to give up their affections or their souls or their hearts was to their own vileness, was because of homosexuality. And it was a representation of the vile affections that men's hearts lusted after. Now I said in conjunction with each giving up, there's a covenant, and there's also a supernatural slaughter. There's also a supernatural, God kills a bunch of people. So let's see. So in the first one we have, he gives up the body, and there's a Noahic covenant, and man may execute man, and there's a worldwide flood. So now in the case of affections, the covenant actually comes before the slaughter. If you turn back to Genesis 17, and God makes a covenant with Abraham in Genesis chapter 17. And he says in verse 4, "As for me, behold, my covenant is with thee, and thou shalt be a father of many nations. Neither shall thy name any more be called Abram, but thy name shall be Abraham. For a father of many nations have I made thee. I will make thee exceeding fruitful, and I will make nations of thee, and kings shall come of thee. And I will establish my covenant between me and thee, and thy seed after thee in their generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto thee, and to thy seed after thee. And I will give unto thee and to thy seed after thee the land wherein thou art a stranger, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. And God said unto Abraham, Thou shalt keep my covenant, therefore, thou and thy seed after thee in thy generations. This is my covenant which ye shall keep between me and you, and thy seed after thee. Every man child among you shall be circumcised." So in Genesis 17, God makes the covenant of circumcision with Abram. He changes his name to Abraham and Sarai's name to Sarah, and he is about to cut off the hearts and the affections of mankind, with the exception of Abraham and the seed of Abraham that will be in the land of Canaan. So that qualifies it down to what will be eventually Israel. And that so here we have we're going to see the Abrahamic, it's the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and the promises of circumcision and multiplied seed. And it says in verse 8, "And I will be their God." He's not going to be the God of the Gentiles anymore. He's only going to be their God. And so then in Genesis 18, we have God tells Abraham, Genesis 18:20, "And the Lord said, Because of the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous, I will go down now and see where they have done altogether according to the cry of it, which is come unto me, and if not, I will know. And the men turned their faces from thence and went toward Sodom, but Abraham stood yet before the Lord." So Abraham bargains with the Lord, and he says, if there's 50, will you save it for 50? Yeah, I'll save it if there's 40. And he gets the whole way down to 10 and says, if there's 10 righteous people in Sodom, I'll spare Sodom. Well, there's not 10 righteous people in Sodom. So the two angels, they go down to Sodom, and Lot sees them, and Lot, knowing the condition of the city, he presses them. They don't want to go into his house. They say, no, we're okay on the street. And he says, no, you have to come into my house. He drags them into their house. And then in Genesis 19, verse 4, "But before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round about, both old and young, all the people from every quarter. And they called unto Lot and said unto him, Where are the men which came into thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them." So here are those vile affections illustrated. The men of Sodom, from young to old, they're pounding down the doors, and they want to sexually assault the men that have come in. And they think they're men, they're actually angels. And so in Genesis 19:10, "But the men put forth their hand," which are the two angels, "and pulled Lot into the house to them, and shut the door. And they smote the men that were at the door of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves to find the door." So even after these men are smitten with blindness, they're not like, "Oh my goodness, we're blind." They're still looking for the door. They just can't find it. They still want to keep doing what they were doing, but they just can't find the door now. So then in Genesis 19, down in verse 24, "Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities, and that which grew upon the ground." Now, that is purported to be the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah there today. That was found by a man back in the early 80s, and since then there have been at least 5 different expeditions of this, and pretty much ignored. But I mean, if you go to YouTube and just search Sodom and Gomorrah, you can find these on there, And it's really interesting. I mean, those little white sulfur balls that they pick out of there, they light them on fire and they just melt and burn, and they say, oh, the smell is terrible. And you know, the scientists say, oh, that's just volcanic ash. But then on the bottom right there, you can see the difference between the brimstone that they pull out and the brimstone that comes from volcanic ash. So that's just a little interesting tidbit I thought I'd throw in there. Now, back to Romans chapter 1, and the third and final giving up. And this is the giving up of their spirits. Excuse me. Now, verse 28. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient, being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventor of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful, who knowing the judgment of God, that when they commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. So last week, both Bob and Tracy went over the idea that the mind in the Scripture, whenever when he gives up the mind, that it is talking of the Spirit, and there's the verses that kind of back that up. So we're not going to go through that. Now, everyone I've ever heard teach on this has always said that the first giving up was the flood, the second giving up was the Tower of Babel, and the third giving up was whenever God called out Abraham, either in Genesis 12 or Genesis 15. And this, I don't believe, is true, because before this, giving over to a reprobate mind, there was a Gentile that was inspired by God who lived after Abraham but before the law. And if you turn to Job chapter 32, and this guy's name was Elihu, and he was a Buzzite. Well, Buzz was the son of Abraham's brother Nahor. So to be a Buzzite, you had to be a descendant of Buzz, so therefore you lived after Abraham did, because Nahor was his brother. Uz and Buzz, they were the two brothers. And so Elihu wasn't of Abraham's lineage, and he came after Abraham, but he came before the law, because in Job there's no priestly order. There's sacrifices made. Job makes his own sacrifices. He doesn't go to a priest to make sacrifices for him. So in Job 32 and verse 8, this is Elihu speaking, and watch what Elihu claims. He says, "But there is a spirit of man, and the inspiration of the Almighty giveth them understanding." Then turn to chapter 32 and verse 4, and this is still Elihu speaking. "The Spirit of God hath made me, and the breath of the Almighty hath given me life. If thou canst answer me, set thy words in order before me. Stand up. Behold, I am according to thy wish in God's stead. I am also formed out of the clay." So here he's saying, 33. I'm sorry, 33. Thank you. I read off my paper, so I don't notice these things whenever I speak badly. Sorry. He is saying, "I'm according to thy wish in God's stead." He said, you said you wanted to talk to God about this. You wanted to intercede with God. I'm here in God's stead. So that means I'm speaking by inspiration. Then in chapter 36 and verse 1, Elihu also proceeded and said, "Suffer me a little, and I will show thee that I have yet to speak on God's behalf." So Elihu was claiming inspiration from God, and Elihu was the only one of Job's comforters, or so-called comforters, that God didn't rebuke. The other three Job had to offer sacrifices for. God never rebuked Elihu. So when Elihu said he was speaking by the inspiration of God, he was. Otherwise, he would have been rebuked to God. So, as we've already said, that Romans 1 is speaking about the Gentiles. Then in Romans 2, he starts talking about the Jews and why they're guilty. So there's a specific event that marks the cutting off of the Gentiles, and it involves a person who didn't want to retain God in his knowledge and a person who knew very well the judgment of God. So when Moses went before Pharaoh and he demanded that the Israelites go out of Egypt, Pharaoh refused. Well, there were the 10 plagues, boom, 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 boom. And then the final plague was that just in Exodus 12:29. Exodus 12 and 29. And we read, And it came to pass that at midnight the Lord smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on the throne, and to the firstborn of the captive that was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of cattle. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. And he called for Moses and Aaron by night, and he said, Rise up and get you forth from among my people, both ye and the children of Israel, and go serve the Lord as ye have said. Also take your flocks and your herds as ye have said, and be gone, and bless me also. So Pharaoh obviously knew the judgment of the Lord, and he even asks Moses, have your Lord bless me also. But did he want to retain God in his knowledge? Well, if you look at Exodus, then flip over to Exodus 14. And in Exodus 14 and verse 5, and it was told the king of Egypt that the people fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and of his servants was turned against the people, and they said, Why have we done this, that we have let Israel go from serving us? And he made ready his chariot, and took his people with him, and he took 600 chosen chariots, and all the chariots of Egypt, and the captains over every one of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh king of Egypt, and he pursued after the children of Israel, and the children of Israel went out with a high hand. So after what had just happened in Egypt, God had done things that his magicians and his gods couldn't do, because they went up to a certain point, and then they said, well, we can't do that. And then finally God smote the firstborn, and every household had someone who was dead in their household. And all that judgment came upon Egypt. And now, not very long after that, he says, I'm going to go after that guy. I'm going to fight against that God again. And he's going to go after these same people that God had just, as he doesn't want to retain God at his knowledge, but he very well knows the judgment of God. So then we all know how that ended up. God delivered Israel, and he slaughtered the Egyptians. And this is where it says in 1 Corinthians 10 that they were baptized unto Moses, and they became a nation. And Tracy's gone over this many times. So then the covenant that goes along with this, in Exodus 19, if you look at Exodus 19, and we're just going to read verses 5 and 6, Now therefore, if ye will obey my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine, and ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which thou shalt speak to the children of Israel. So part of that covenant was, if you do what I tell you to do, you're going to be a kingdom of priests. Well, what is a priest? A priest is an intercessor between man and God. Well, if you're a kingdom of priests, there's nobody in that kingdom that you need to intercede for. So obviously you're going to go out and intercede for the Gentile nations. So this was God's plan now. He gave up the bodies at the flood, the souls at the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and here the destruction of Pharaoh's army. He gives up the spirits, but he has a plan, and that covenant is to get them back. And now we're going to try and get them back. So that is the history of Romans chapter 1. And when one considers this, one common question that has always comes up, and this question should be answered for us, it's, would a righteous and just God condemn someone who had no idea he even existed? Or how can a loving God send someone to hell who's never heard of him? Well, that question is common, and it blames God for people not knowing. And 70 years ago, it would have been pretty difficult to find somebody in this country or in England who wasn't aware of God and who wasn't aware of the gospel. They might not have known, but and 70 years, even 40 years ago, you go to almost any child and ask them about Samson, you ask them about Elijah, you ask them about any of those, and they pretty much knew. Now, they don't really know so much. So what about if 50 years from now, they make the King James Bible illegal because it's discriminatory and it's intolerant. Yeah, and it's intolerant. And then 75 years from now, there's only a handful of believers left in America. Is that God's fault? Is that God's? No, it's not God's fault. So if right now if you own a computer and you have access to the internet anywhere in the world, you are without excuse. But 150 years ago that wasn't the case. But then in Colossians 1, just turn to Colossians 1. And in Colossians 1, Paul says this. Colossians 1:23. If ye continue in the faith, grounded and settled, and be not moved away from the hope of the gospel, which ye have heard, and which was preached to every creature which is under heaven, wherefore I, Paul, am made minister. So if somebody never gets the opportunity or never got the opportunity to hear the gospel, it's the fault of their ancestors. It's not the fault of God. And that's all I have to say about that. So let's end in a word of prayer. Yeah, question. Two.
Comment and a question.
Okay.
Comment is...
Ron, turn up. Did you turn? Okay.
The thing about Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah.
And they found what they think is Sodom and Gomorrah. That's, if you, again, go online, YouTube and all, there are so many archaeological finds that are confirming Scripture. There's a whole area of study about trying to confirm the Exodus. That Israel, in fact, was in Egypt. They did leave Egypt and the Red Sea, all that kind of stuff. So that's great. I'm glad people are trying to do that, but we need to be careful. It's nice when they find something that confirms what you believed anyhow.
Right.
But you can't believe it because they found it.
Right.
So whether they find anything that confirms it or not.
Right. Yeah, that's not faith. Then you say, well, exactly. There we dug this up, but yeah, right.
A lot of people are like they'll say, well, now we're finding out that this is true. No, it's always been true.
Right.
You're just figuring out.
Right. Back in the 1700s, they didn't believe Nineveh ever existed, and then they discovered it, and then they found all these writings and and Sennacherib and all that, and yeah.
So that's just we just need to.
It's confirmation of our faith, but it's not really.
It's not the basis of our faith.
Right. Because there's a lot of stuff in the Bible that hasn't been confirmed, and we still believe that.
And may never be.
Right.
Still, yeah. Second thing, and this is a question about all the names. Throw all the names. This name means this.
Mm-hmm.
This name means this. So I guess this is kind of a which came first, the chicken or the egg question. Like the one lady whose name meant beautiful.
Sweetness and sweetness.
So, was she supernaturally named that because she was going to be beautiful and sweet, and that's what the name already meant? Or was she named that, and it turned out she was beautiful and sweet, so after the fact they said, well, Nadine means beautiful and sweet, so... Or Nadine is beautiful and sweet, so we'll say that name means beautiful and sweet.
I don't know. Well, just like Methuselah, when he is dead, it will come.
Right.
And that,
But I guess the Bible never says that's what his name means.
well, that's true. That's
You know,
true.
but
You
no.
go back to the.
So we know that when he died, it came.
Mm-hmm.
So now somebody down the road said, "Oh, well, I guess that's what Methuselah means then."
Well, yeah, that's very possible because I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't think the God is supernaturally naming people, and then some.
Well, that's really the question.
Yeah.
Is God intervening in the affairs of men and supernaturally naming this person because he knows that's what they're going to do, or is it just mankind observing? Hey, this Lamech turned out to be a builder of whatever, and so okay, Lamech means a builder of whatever. Because,
Yeah, that's very possible. I mean, that's the way language can grow and so on, and it'll, it could also mean, like we talked about before with the verses in the Bible. They weren't inspired, but God knew where they would be, and so did the chicken or the egg, and and I don't know. Do you know? Does anybody know?
Well, I tend to think it's the second. I don't think God was supernaturally naming people.
Yeah, their name. So like the Tubal Cain. He's going after the way of Cain. So we're gonna just Tubal or else we're gonna stick Cain on the end of his name to show that he's following after Cain and.
I mean, we do that like we'll say something is a very Jeffersonian idea.
Yeah.
Well, Thomas Jefferson's name
Doesn't mean
all this
libertarianism. Yeah.
libertarianism and all
Yeah.
that. But because he became associated with that, we now look back and say, well, that's a Jeffersonian
Right.
idea. So
Right.
I think that's the way it was, but I was just curious because
Well, I certainly
somebody
don't.
did his name stuff really.
Yeah,
really deep.
yeah, and I think that it's very useful because sometimes it's very illuminating. But I mean, like when you take the first 7 names of, they do that and they take the Adam means man and then Seth means this and this and it shows the gospel but I don't know. So
It seems like that all comes after the fact.
yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It seems that way,
It
but we can't.
It doesn't say, they named Lamech because it means this.
Right.
And that's what he was going to do.
Right.
Like
Right.
afterwards, in a book somewhere, somebody said, oh, well, Lamech means.
Yeah,
blah, blah, blah.
yeah. Okay, let's pray. Our Father, we thank you for this time together, and we thank you, Lord, that even though you did give the Gentiles up, that you came back, and whenever Israel fell, you made us all one, and we're now all one body through the blood of Jesus Christ, and we thank you for that. In his name, amen.